Well, now for the second in our series looking at the musical side of the family. Neil Hannon is the lead singer of the Divine Comedy, one of the most successful bands to come out of Northern Ireland. His father is a bishop, but let's let him introduce himself.
I'm Brian Hannon, and I'm the Church of Ireland Bishop of Clogher. My son, Neil, is a pop star, and that has been very interesting to come to terms with, because there are likenesses between his world and mine. We're both communicating, we're both in the public eye, we're both giving an idea of what we believe in, the values we live by, our view of society. I think I was downright terrified. Clogher Diocese is 100 miles long and it's 40 miles wide, and it's cross-border diocese, half north, half south, but all in Ulster. And it's like a great big country parish. I constantly meet people that I know, and I constantly meet people who know me. Some of them are my own flock, some of them are of other denominations. They're very conservative. They don't wear their heart on their sleeve. And everything that you say is noted very carefully. Every political vibration, every little nuance of what you say, how you say it, why you're saying it. Are you betraying somebody? Is somebody going to take it up the wrong way? It means you're very sensitive. So if you have somebody who's going to be in the public eye, who has a mind of his own, as he has, and you don't know how he's going to exercise his ministry, if you don't mind my using the word, and if you know occasionally that he will use words that you wouldn't use, I was very fearful of what that might do to my ministry, and even just what it might do to me. You might be interested that the latest album, Fin de siècle, rather fine title, the end of the century, almost the end of the world feeling, and where are we going from there? I, about 3 or 4 months in advance, had a tape of what was going to be on that. Couldn't get all the words, but had a good idea. And of course the first song was Generation Sex, and the last song was about Enniskillen and Londonderry. So I had something about sex, and God alone would know quite what he was going to be saying and what the song was saying. And at the end of it, there was a song that was bound to involve Northern Ireland politics. I actually wrote off and asked them to send me a transcript of all the words, at least so that I would know what I was in for. And it has been fascinating to look at it, to think it through. And I found sometimes he was saying what I would totally agree with. There's some words at the beginning of it. As long as we can all watch what's going on, everything will be okay. But this generation sex elects the type of guys you wouldn't leave your kids with, and then shouts off for their heads if they get laid. It's quite tough stuff. But I soon realized that he was saying many things that need to be said, and that sometimes, because of the fear of even the use of the word sex, you weren't saying in the pulpit, and he can say it much more effectively than I can.
Generation sex respects the rights of girls who wanna take their clothes off, as long as we can all watch, that's okay. And Generation sex elects the type of guys you wouldn't leave your kids with, shouts off with their heads if they get laid. Lovers watch their backs as hacks in backs take snaps through telephoto lenses, chase Mercedes Benzes through the night. The morning nation weeps and wails, who keeps the sails of evil tabloids healthy. The poor protect the
only one of the boys who was a Derry boy. The others were born in Mid-Ulster. And so they all grew up in the Troubles. And they knew what it was to go to school through barricades, burning tires or something blocking the road on the way. And indeed, they took the sound of bombs for granted. Although you didn't very often see these things happening, and you could be very close to trouble without realizing. The day that is now known as Bloody Sunday, I had a christening in the church in the afternoon of that Sunday. As I went down, I saw the crowds walking down from the Craigan down into Bogside to have their demonstration. The christening happened, I went home, had my tea, came back for the evening service, and we thought that there'd been some trouble, but we didn't know what had happened. So I was actually 600 yards from where that was happening in the city on the day that it happened, and yet I only heard what happened and saw what happened on the television at 9 o'clock that night. When Neil was 14, he was still a choir boy in the cathedral in Enniskillen, and he was part of a group of boys from whom they were going to choose someone to sing Fauré's Pie Jesu from the Requiem at the opening of the Marble Arch Caves in County Fermanagh. There's a magnificent cave, which I think they call the organ pipes or something like that, and Neil was the boy who was chosen. When he actually did the singing for the television in the caves, but it had been pre-recorded in the cathedral, he had to mime it. And he really mimed it as to the manner born. I couldn't believe it. You couldn't have told. And there were parishioners who said to me, how did they get the organ down the caves? It was at the age of 14 that he decided he was going to be a pop star. And throughout his development, gradually, all his work moved from what he was supposed to be doing in school to what he wanted to do. He was to do an art foundation course in Liverpool, and he suddenly said to his mum, to myself, I'm sorry, I'm not going to university. We both felt that security angle that all parents feel. You must go to university first, then do what you like. Get your qualifications, then you'll have something to fall back on, which of course presumed that you may fail. He never presumed that he would fail. He was quite determined that he could make it, that he would make it, that he was in a sense born to be a songwriter. He was asked to be one of 7 groups or individuals from the music world to take a song of Noel Coward's and just to do their thing with it. And he took on that with a heart and a half, that we nearly fell over laughing. Not laughing at it, but laughing at the daring of it, and also at the astonishing mimicry or almost take-off of Noel Coward. Then suddenly the marvellous party becomes hard rock. And the shock of that, after the delicacy of the Noel Coward, well, it took me to the fair.
I must say it's the most extraordinary experience. Not everybody, I suppose, it's something to do with the sun and all that, and I wouldn't understand it myself, really, and I'm not sure it's even legal. You know, quite for no reason, I'm here for the season, and high as a kite, living in error with Maudit Cap Pharaoh, which couldn't be right. Everyone's here and frightfully gay. Nobody cares what people say, though the Riviera seems really much queerer than Rome at its height. On Wednesday night, I went to a marvellous party with Nunu and Nada and Nell. It was in the fresh air, and we went as we were, and we stayed as we were, which was hell. poor Grace started singing at midnight, and she didn't stop singing till 4. We knew the excitement was bound to begin when Laura got blind on Bonnie and gin and scratched her bin here with a Cartier pin. I couldn't have liked it.
I couldn't have liked it more. I've been to a marvelous party. We played a wonderful game.
In the early days, Neil called his band October. I always thought of it as his red phase. But when the other boys in that first band all decided they were going to go on to university, he, of course, decided that he would continue and he would reassemble a band. And he was working at home at that stage and working away on his music when, incidentally, he shut himself away in the attic for about a year when he listened to no other music and worked on his own, drove us half mad with the repetitive noises that were coming from the Bechstein Grand. And he came down one day into the little cubbyhole room that I was sitting in, and he said, "Dad, I've got it." And I hadn't a notion what he was talking about, and I said, "What have you got?" "Well, the name, the new name of the band." I said, "Yeah." I didn't think I was going to be consulted, to tell you the truth. So he said, "The Passion." I suppose I sort of gulped. And I sat there and I thought for a moment, and I said, "Neil, the Passion means a lot of things. And I'm not sure that, much as I love you, that you and I can live in the same house with me in my present ministry at the same time." And he looked at me nonplussed, wasn't quite sure, I think, what I'd said, and disappeared with a sharp closing of the door behind him. And about a couple of hours later, he came down again into the room, absolutely his normal self, and said, "Dad, I've got it. The Divine Comedy." And I thought for a moment, and I said, "Neil, that's spot on." Interestingly enough, he couldn't deny his religious upbringing. He knew that life is an extraordinary tragedy-comedy mixture, because he's lived through Northern Ireland for all his life. And that seemed to me to be what he was about. And I think it's illustrated by something he did at a later stage. The band was already formed, and I keep discovering, or we keep discovering, things that we didn't realize he could do. And he had been here, and he went on his own to Belfast. This was for the BBC, and he sat down like Victoria would at the piano with a microphone in front of him, and he started to do some of his songs simply accompanying himself. And then suddenly, in the middle of that, he suddenly said, "You'll be surprised at what I'm going to sing next, but I'm going to sing it anyway." He had chosen his grandfather's favorite hymn, and he proceeded to sing "Dear Lord and Father of Mankind" straight. And again, it's something that produced a tremendous effect in the populace around, because Northern Ireland is a religious society in some sense, a very mixed sense, but people know hymns. People are used to religious things, and to hear somebody from the pop world suddenly in the middle of a pop concert sing a hymn both astonished them, and it was very moving.
Right, well, we promised you that Neil would be back with us this evening, and back he is. He's going to give us something very, very special. You would not get this on any other show. This is particularly wonderful. Mr. Neil Hannon.
Thank you.
Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways, reclothe us in our rightful mind, in purer lives thy service find, in deeper reverence praise, in deeper reverence
taught all our boys, whether it's been religious education in school, and of course in preparation for confirmation. That's quite tough with your own family when you know them too well. It's a bit like marrying somebody of your own family. You suddenly realize just the depth of the questions that you're putting. Now, whether I can hold myself therefore responsible for what Neil has ended up thinking, I don't know, because I'm a parent on the one hand, I'm a cleric on another hand. I care about my religion and my faith, and he goes out into the pop world and he suddenly says to some people one day, of course I'm an atheist. Draw eyes to views of quietness. This, of course, gets back to you, not surprisingly, as a bishop of a diocese. I remember he came home not long after that, and we were walking with the dogs, and I said to him, Neil, I hear you're an atheist. So we started chatting about that, and after we'd had a long chat, I said, Neil, you're no more an atheist than I am. You may be agnostic. And of course, a lot of his songs do ask questions. He doesn't give the answers always. Now, he hasn't got an overt message, but he delivers all sorts of values, whether he knows it or not. Sometimes people have asked me, what is pop music? And because what I had to learn very quickly was that pop music is as variable and as widespread as any classical repertoire is. I've been very fortunate to have known music all my days. I loved visiting my granny Denny up in North Antrim. And I used to go down here sometimes playing Chopin Ballade or Debussy, or even the Rustle of Spring very well. She lived until 93, and even when she died of cancer at the age of 93, she got herself put in a wheelchair, wheeled along to this piano daily, held upright while she practiced for 5 minutes, and then brought back to bed. Granny had the Bechstein, we had a Steinway, and my mother had a Stradivarius, and she was well able in her early days to have become a concert pianist and to have played with orchestras. She married very young. She had 6 of us, and at one stage she actually sold the Stradivarius before these things became huge sale value, sold it to get a clothes washing machine to be able to look after the family with not a very large income. So I had all these views of what pop music was and of what pop musicians are like, and often people have asked me, what sort of a life do they live? The first thing I discovered was it was a very tough life, and in the early stages it was the bare boards. It's odd in a way on tour, they are rather isolated, and I think people take it for granted that drugs and sex and all the rest of it are obviously part of that world. I even got a bit of a shock when on the front of one of the albums Neil was smoking a cigarette, which could have been anything, and I said, it's a pity that you were smoking a cigarette on the front of it. And he said, oh, the producer thought it was part of the image and stuffed it into my mouth just before the photograph was taken. Well, be that as it may, there are more serious things. But I really did wonder at times what sort of a crowd he was getting in among. And when we went to see him on one occasion, quite early stages, at the Ulster Hall, he'd said to us, just come round backstage and meet the band. We had either of us really met the band before. So we went round and had great chat and all sorts of things and getting to know them a bit. And just before we left at the end of it to go home, I said to Neil, it's an awful pity that you weren't able to bring them all home. They really are a very nice lot. And he pricked up his ears and he looked at me. He said, Dad, what did you expect? We have always worked on the basis that they have got to make up their own minds as to how they live their lives, what their relationships are, what the permanence of those are, and what they do or don't do about their lifestyle. I used to, as an unmarried cleric, I used to go, and when I was asked to preach at Mothers' Union services, and I would tell everybody what they should be doing and how they should be exercising their parenthood and all the rest of it. By gosh, I know now that it is a much more difficult job, and I know just all the problems that you actually face. And in dealing with the boys, I've found in general terms, it's a question always in parenting, the balance between exercising your responsibility, and yes, and your discipline as a parent, alongside love and trust that grants independence. Because you can't hang on to them. I think that's the great thing about Neil and the others. They all struck out. They accepted their independence rather than took it. And I think because that had been given to them, just as I can only exercise any form of authority as a bishop, as an authority of respect, what people give to me. I don't normally express what I would call overtly political opinions, because that's for people to make up their own mind and to vote where they will. If people vote for a process, which I was very glad that they did, even with all the difficulties that are attached to it, I would therefore feel that since it's a community, vast majority decision, that we want that to work, and I would back that to the hilt. So when I saw the song Sunrise at the end of the recent album, which is really about the Inniskillen upbringing, the Londonderry background, I pricked up my ears, because depending on what was said, how it was said, I was wondering, will I be able to live with this? What was Neil going to say? Well, he was able in really very few words to say that he was born in Londonderry, born in Derry City. And of course, even the use of which word depends on what your background is, so much so that people were so sensitive they ended up calling it Stroke City. Derry stroke Londonderry. Then he grew up in Inniskillen, or Inishkathleen. How clever to watch your hometown be destroyed. But he says in the song, I knew that I wouldn't stay long, so I kept my head down and carried on, and many people do that. Oh, sure, I'll be out of here. And then he says what I think an awful lot of young people now feel, and indeed a great many young people south of the border, which has changed dramatically in the way it looks at things. Who cares, he says, where national borders lie, whose laws you're governed by, what name you call a town, when you're 6 feet below the ground. In a sense, it's not for me to say it, but he has every right as a young person to say that, and indeed to say what I do in many ways, in fact, agree with, but which it is not my job to go out preaching. And then finally, he doesn't say, all right, there's the dawn of a new day coming. He doesn't just say that outright. He says there's a hint of blue in the black sky, a ray of hope, lovely build-up, crescendo, and then with magnificent voice production that I didn't know he had it in him, this marvelous proclamation of the sunrise, hitting a high note that I could never have hit, with a complete freedom that belied the rather controlled childhood treble singing. It's the sunrise. Can you see the sunrise? I can see the sunrise. It is the sun rising. Now that was a proclamation of faith, of hope, and that it really will happen. And please God, if people have got the guts it will.
I was born in Londonderry. I was born in Derry City too. Oh, what a special child to see such things and still to smile. I knew that there was something wrong, but I kept my head down and carried on. I grew up in Enniskillen, and I grew up in Inniskathleen too. Oh, what a clever boy to watch your hometown be destroyed. I knew that I could not stay long, so I kept my head down and carried on. Who cares where national borders lie? Who cares whose laws you're governed by? Who cares what name you call a town? Who cares when you're 6 feet beneath the From the corner of my eye, a hint of blue in the black sky, a ray of hope, a beam of light, an end to 30 years of night. The church bells ring, the children sing. What is this strange and beautiful thing? Is the sunrise? Can you see the sunrise? I can see the sunrise. It's the sunrise.
Neil Hannon and the Divine Comedy in Sunrise. The programme was presented by his father, the Right Reverend Brian Hannon, Bishop of Clocher. The producer was Bill Lloyd.